No bills have been introduced. The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1 in the name of Chris Bishop.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. How is the growing economy, which is delivering higher employment and rising wages, helping to reduce hardship and child poverty in New Zealand?
Order. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, earlier today the Ministry of Social Development released its annual household incomes report on the material well-being of New Zealand households. Across a large range of measures, the report finds that household incomes have been growing solidly since 2011 in real terms, that is after inflation, with slightly higher gains for lower income households. The report also finds there is no evidence of increasing hardship or child poverty. In fact, there is evidence pointing to falling hardship and child poverty rates. The report also points to the cost of housing and housing quality as significant issues. However, the report covers the year to 30 June 2015 and so does not take into account recent increases in benefits and working for families.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How are rising household incomes helping to reduce poverty for New Zealand households and families?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, while we have seen reasonably significant wage growth under this government, up 25% since 2008, the report by MSD says household incomes are growing faster than wages, in part due to rising total hours and paid employment per household. This reflects rising female workforce participation. Higher household incomes are translating to moderating or improving household poverty rates. The report by MSD concludes, and I quote, "There is no evidence of any rise from 2008, just before the GFC, in income poverty, either before or after deducting housing costs." It also says there is no evidence of any increasing depth of relative income poverty over the last 2 decades, and there is no evidence of any sustained rise or fall in household income inequality before housing costs in the last 10 to 15 years using a 90-to-10 incomes ratio, or the last 20 years using a Gini measure, or the last 25 years using the top 1% share of incomes.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does Table D9 on page 84 of the report show that the top 10% incomes in New Zealand are a record 9.82 times larger than the incomes of the bottom 10%?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I can't, in the short time available, locate that exact graph for the member, although I note it took him to page 84 to find the thing that he was looking for to point out that things were possibly getting worse, when most of the report says that things are getting better.
Yep. Order. Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What are the main drivers of falling hardship, as reported in the Household Incomes Report, particularly since 2011?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the Household Incomes Report says the impact of the global financial crisis on New Zealand was relatively muted, and New Zealand's recovery from the GFC has been relatively strong. MSD says the effects of the recovery from the GFC on hardship are clear, with a substantial fall in hardship between 2011 and 2015. The report says, and again I quote, "The general state of the economy, wages and employment especially, has had a rapid and noticeable impact on those in lesser hardship and those just getting by." However, the report goes on to say the effects for those in deeper hardship are less noticeable, and that is why the government is taking steps to increase support for the most vulnerable New Zealanders, such as by insulating every state house that's possible to do, delivering free GP visits for under 13s, increasing childcare assistance for low-income working families, alongside benefit increases.
Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How do New Zealand rates of poverty and inequality compare to other OECD countries?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the Household Incomes Report at New Zealand compares reasonably well to other OECD countries across a range of measures, particularly since the global financial crisis. Real household incomes in New Zealand have grown by around 12% since 2011. Income gains have been right across the income spectrum and in fact slightly higher for lower income households. By comparison, the UK's median household income fell through the GFC and has only just returned to its pre-GFC level. Incomes in Italy, Spain, France and Germany were flat through the GFC and have remained so, and US median household income has been flat for many years.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does page 15 of the summary document, which I'm sure the Minister has read, say that, quote, there is evidence of higher after housing cost income inequality in the last few years as compared with the mid-2000s and earlier, and along with the fact that the top 10% of incomes are now 10 times higher than the bottom 10%, doesn't it show that under National, the rich are getting richer and everyone else is getting poorer?
The Honourable
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no, I don't agree with the member's contention. If he looks at the graph on page, if he looks at the graph on page 19, he will see that housing costs as a proportion of income for the bottom quintile have been rising steadily since around 2000. Nobody's arguing that the issue of housing costs is not an issue, which is why the government has a comprehensive housing plan which is lifting the supply of housing. In reference to the member's earlier question, Mr Speaker, I note that the table D9 in the incomes report is in fact a before housing cost measure. The average since 2008 is 8.5, not 10, and the ministry would note that you should not take 1 year alone, as the report warns against doing exactly that.
Order. Question number 2.